Welcome all for today's session, Shared Mobility for Rural and Tribal Areas. My name is Ranjit Koravarti. I'll be the moderator as well as a speaker for today's session. And we are aware, so I'll give a little bit of bio of myself. I'm an assistant professor at North Dakota State University. I'm also a researcher with the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute at North Dakota State University. My research interests are shared mobility in rural communities, rural and small urban transit, and autonomous transit. With that, a brief introduction. Getting into the session, well, we are aware and we look at a lot of shared mobility options that are primarily housed in big cities and urban communities. So how are these shared mobility services applicable to rural and tribal communities? Shared mobility and transit operations are possible and are active in rural and tribal areas. However, they are not simply dense urban networks on a different scale. Shared mobility in rural and tribal communities follow a different business model as the transportation challenges are unique in these communities. And this panel of experts and implementers discusses the different goals, funding, and operations of various innovative systems. We have 4 great speakers today. I'll be starting off the session, and we have the next speaker. We have John Ando, is the Executive Director, CEO of Central Midlands Regional Transit Authority in South Carolina. And John will be talking about the Comet operating in a rural and urban environment. Hi, John.
Hi.
And a brief bio of John. Mr. Ando has a strong passion for public transportation and has been working in the public transit industry since age 13. Working on as an intern at the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority in San Jose, California. He first became a transit manager at the Riverbank Oakdale Transit Authority, working for the board of directors and implementing an intercity transit service, and has run many systems since. He began leading the Comet in April of 2018. Ando has overseen the preparation of short and long-range transit plans and strategic plans for the transit systems he has managed. He has a robust understanding of Federal Transit Administration grants, funding programs, and compliance, including obtaining BET recipient status from the FDA and preparation of compliance documents. He has started many small urban and rural transit systems, as well as implementing transformational process to make them efficient and progressive. The second speaker we have today is Kendra McCady. Kendra McCady has been director of Pelivan Transit, Northeast Tribal Transit Consortium since March 2016. As a director, she oversees all facets of the operations, which covers 4,466 square miles in the 7 counties of Northeast Oklahoma, and provides transit services for the Cherokee Nation and 9 tribes of Ottawa County, located in Northeast Oklahoma. Pelivan Transit is the lead agency for Veterans Ride Connect, a consortium of 6 rural and tribal transit providers offering discounted trips to veterans across the state of Oklahoma. And Pelivan Transit is 2019 Community Transport Association of America Rural Transit System of the Year, 2019 Oklahoma Transit Association System of the Year, and received the OTA Rural Innovation Award. Congrats, Kendra.
Thank you. I sound so fancy, don't I?
Yeah. Kendra is also a member of Southwest Transit Association Board of Directors, Oklahoma Transit Association Board of Directors, a member of the Transit Center for Applied Technology Advisory Council, and serves as the chair of the Cherokee Nation Phoenix Editorial Board of Directors. And today, Kendra will be talking about shared mobility for rural and tribal areas. And our next speaker will be Creighton Randall. He's the CEO of Mobility Development Group. Creighton will be talking about my Miocar and Vogo, 2 rural shared mobility models in the San Joaquin Valley. Creighton leads work around the US to develop pilot programs and funding for shared mobility networks and focuses on disadvantaged communities. Mobility developments have evolved to provide both initial development and technical assistance to continue control shared mobility networks as back office and operational support of these programs in cases where a private market for services doesn't exist. So Creighton works to support the Blue LA program in Los Angeles, Miocar, Vamos in the San Joaquin Valley, and a range of programs throughout the Midwest and Northern US. Creighton career in shared mobility began in 2009 with Buffalo Car Share, a nonprofit operation that served 1,000 members, half of whom represented household earnings less than 25,000. After co-founding the leading Buffalo Car Share for 6 years, Mr. Randall joined a Shared Use Mobility Center, serving as Program and Development Director from the nonprofit's inception in 2014 to January 2018, and when he formed Mobility Development. Welcome, Creighton. With that brief introduction, each speaker will be having 10 to 15 minutes, and I'll be giving a reminder at 13 minutes. And we could save the questions towards the end, and the attendees can also use the chat room to post any questions that could be answered in the meantime. So to kick off the session, I'll start my presentation. Let me share my screen here. All right. So today I'll be talking about shared use mobility practices in rural areas. This is a summary of the study that we have recently completed. This is an NCHRP Task 76 project. And the contractor version of the report is available online. And I have pasted a link here for you to access the report in case you're interested. You could also Google my project title to find it out. But this is the report I just pulled it up here just in case, but the contractor version of the report is available online.
Hey, Ranjit, we can't see your screen.
Okay, let's see.
So go to full screen and zoom, and then the middle green arrow in the bottom.
Oh yeah, sure. All right, can you see? You should see now.
Yep.
All right then. So I'll be talking about shared use mobility in rural areas, and sorry about earlier, but this is the link for our contractor version of the report. And I just pulled up the report here. So if you access the link, you could review our report. But so I'll be presenting some of the findings from our study, NCHRP Task 76. So just a quick sneak peek into our research team. I'm the PI for the study, and we had researchers from WSP and NDSU as well. So this is a project in collaboration with NDSU and WSP. Let's see. So before I start my talk, a quick note on how this presentation and report could be useful to you. If you are a state DOT representative, transit agency representative, or rural community representative, and if you're aware your state or community has unmet mobility needs in rural communities, this study can help identify the type of shared use mobility service that can meet your rural community mobility needs. Example, maybe a rural ride sourcing program could be a good fit for you to fulfill your mobility needs. So maybe a bike sharing program in rural community could bring in active transportation options. So, but if you already have a type of shared use mobility service in mind that can work for your state or community, this report can guide rural community representatives and their stakeholders to strategically plan and implement shared use mobility services in your communities. So the report also provides guidance for various agencies on strategies to promote and advance rural shared use mobility practices. So a quick introduction. Some of these bullets are pretty basic for attendees of this conference, so I'll just skip to the third bullet. So it has to be noted that technology-enabled shared use mobility services are prominent in urban setup compared to rural. In rural communities, however, public transit services are critical, considered critical. Services such as ADA paratransit services, demand response transit services, specialized transportation services are still prominent and highly relied upon in rural communities. And These conventional services provide lifelines to their users, connecting them to healthcare providers, employment opportunities, educational institutions, and social activities. Well, while these conventional transit services provide lifelines to their users, emerging shared use mobility services have the potential to fill the mobility gaps and provide flexible transportation options. So this study investigated various categories of shared use mobility services that could potentially be applied primarily in rural communities, but also the report results could also be useful for small urban areas. So some of the shared usability practices considered in the study. So we have investigated, we have included categories such as ride sourcing, car sharing, bike sharing, and microtransit services. So the potential for these strategies in rural communities. And the study also has focused on mobility as service framework for applicability in rural communities. So if you look at the definition in the study, the research team defines rural community as those having population less than 50,000, and small urban communities have as those having population of more than 50,000 but less than 200,000. So this definition was established by the US Census Bureau and is used by FDA to distinguish rural from small and large urbanized areas in the administration for its formula programs. So a sneak peek into some of the research tasks involved in our study. This study was conducted towards the end of 2018 and beginning of 2019. So during the time, we have monitored relevant Federal Transit Administration's Mobility on Demand sandbox projects, state DOT initiatives. So among these initiatives, if there are any initiatives, particularly in rural or small urban communities, we have learned lessons from them. We have conducted interviews. We conducted shared use mobility interviews with shared use mobility agency contacts and also rural community contacts with regard to initial rural shared use mobility implementations to learn about opportunities and challenges for various shared use mobility practices in rural communities. We have also conducted 8 in-depth case studies of most relevant rural SUM implementations. So we conducted the case studies to learn about the planning and implementation aspects of the rural SUM implementation. So we will take this planning and implementation framework towards the toolkit so it could be useful for other communities to plan and implement. So if you see, we have 2 outputs here. The first output is a rural SUM toolkit, shared usability toolkit. So this toolkit can help rural communities become informed about the tasks involved for strategically planning and implementing various SUM services. And the second output we have is guidance for state DOTs and other agencies to promote SUM services in rural areas. And this guidance document provides detailed guidance on the role of government, rural transit agencies, transportation planning agencies, or other agencies. So basically, role of all these agencies to advance shared usability practices in rural communities. So once we have these 2 toolkits, we also have validated these 2 toolkits with focus group meetings from the experts. So a quick overview of the shared usability interviews we have conducted with the providers as well as the community contacts. So if you look at this table here, for each category, we have conducted interviews with agencies as well as community. For example, if we are looking at ride sourcing, we have agencies in this space operating Uber, Lyft, Phoenix Mobility Rising, Ruby Ride. So we conducted interviews with policy team at Uber and Lyft. We talked with folks at Phoenix Mobility Rising and Ruby Ride. And as for communities, we have conducted interviews with people at the rural community of North Dakota, Minnesota, because they were implementing some sort of a ride sourcing program in their community. So we wanted to talk to them to learn about the lessons and their motives and any success stories learned. So similarly, if you look at various categories for car sharing, we have interviewed Zipcar, Maven, and few communities. For bike sharing, we didn't have opportunity to interview agencies, but we did interview some communities. For microtransit, you could see we have interviewed VIA and the community of Arlington, Texas. Arlington is not a rural community or a small urban community according to our definition, but that is the closest to a small community which is implementing a microtransit service. So we had to include that to learn in lessons of how it could be applicable to smaller communities, specifically rural and smaller urban. So we have also looked at rural mobility as a service framework. So we had few agencies that are implementing as well as few communities. So just for an overview, interviews were conducted primarily to better understand the applicability of various shared usability practices in rural communities by learning from initial rural SUM implementations, as well as seeking input on best practices for successful rural shared usability implementations. So apart from that, we have conducted 8 in-depth case studies to cover rural SUM implementations such as ride sourcing, car sharing, bike sharing, van pool, or microtransit service. So you can see in this picture here that the case studies were that we have conducted were distributed across the United States, and they cover various categories of SUM services. So if you start from left, we have conducted a case study with Green Retros electric vehicle ride sharing. We conducted a case study of Green Retros electric vehicle ride sourcing program in the rural community of Huron, California. Similarly, we conducted a case study with the rural community of Needles on the Needles car share program. So they had a small share car share program with just 2 vehicles and a lot of subsidies. And we conducted a case study of Via Microtransit service that I just described. And we have also conducted a case study of library model bike sharing at Allen County, and mobility as service case study with Winnebago County. And again, case study with three rural counties in Michigan as a part of the Michigan Grand Challenge. So they were implementing a mobility as a service framework in these 3 rural communities. So we have also looked at Pennsylvania Van Pool Incentive Program as one of the case study. And we have also looked at the NEMT Lift partnerships as one of the case studies. So total of 8 case studies. So we wanted to learn their structure and their plan on how they have implemented from the inception towards deploying of these services. So we wanted to get a framework that could be useful for other communities. So based on the information learned from the literature review, FDA and state DOT initiatives, our interviews and case studies, we have created a 5-task toolkit that could be useful for rural communities to implement any particular shared usability service. So I'll go over these tasks one by one. So this is a 5-task process to strategically plan, pilot, and implement relevant shared usability services to meet the unique transportation needs for their rural communities, in rural communities. So task 1 is to identify mobility gaps and determine service needs. So in this, we have subtasks. The first subtask is gather input from citizens and community representatives. So inputs such as mobility gaps, barriers for transportation, and the efficiency of existing rural transit services or specialized transportation services. So inputs like this could be gathered to understand the gaps in the service from the citizens as well as community representatives. The next subtask would be leadership from community partners is also important at this stage to follow strategic planning process to identify and address transportation challenges. So representatives from state or regional or local agencies can form a planning committee or an advisory group to follow a strategic planning process to identify and address the transportation challenges. So a community champion along with a lead organization should be identified at this initial task, and it is very critical towards a pilot program of a project of a shared usability project. So again, apart from that, in task 1, preliminary partnerships can also be formed at this stage to facilitate a strategic planning process. So rural communities can form preliminary partnerships with state, regional, or local agencies, healthcare organizations, or economic or workforce development agencies, or local employers. So partnerships with these agencies can be helpful to facilitate strategic planning process for potential shared usability service planning and implementation. So once we identify mobility gaps and determine the service needs in task 1, we could move to task 2, where we determine the shared usability category that best suits the rural community needs. So you have different strategies, and maybe some of them could be applicable to you and some of them maybe not. So rural communities can address identified mobility challenges by building use cases that they want SUM service providers to address. So shared usability strategies that can potentially address rural mobility challenges include ride sourcing services or car sharing, bike sharing, or microtransit. So one of these. So if you're thinking about ride sourcing services, they have the potential to provide on-demand short distance trips for elderly or NEMT recipients, veterans, and the general public in rural communities. But if you're talking about car sharing, they can meet specific use case in rural communities by offering access to automobile for a short period of time to residents without vehicles or individuals, low-income individuals, and people without driver's license looking for independent mobility options. For bike sharing services, bike sharing models such as low-cost bike sharing, library model, or community bike donations models were identified as an affordable systems to promote active transportation options in rural communities. As for microtransit services, microtransit service implementations did not exist in rural communities as of writing of this report. However, interest is identified from microtransit service providers to enter the rural market. So that is important in case some rural communities wanted to bring in microtransit service. We also have a strategy of rural mobility as a service where it can integrate already existing transportation services along with any additional shared disability services onto one platform. So target users can access information, make trip reservations, pay for the trip, and receive trip alerts when needed, all at one place. So that is pretty easy process for the users. So once a transit agency or rural community determines what strategy they wanted to finalize on, maybe the use case gives them the best fit for ride sourcing. The next step is task 3, which is public-private partnerships. So the agency leading the potential rural shared disability implementation effort, along with other partners, should begin exploring opportunities for partnerships with the SUM service providers in that particular category. So if your category is ride sourcing, maybe you're looking at Uber, Lyft, Phoenix Mobility Rising, or Ruby Ride, or maybe any other services. If you're looking at bike sharing, you're looking at companies, providers that provide bike sharing services. So agencies should start looking at these companies for potential public-private partnerships because they are the one who provide these services. So, and public-private partnerships are critical for shared mobility implementations in rural communities. And once we have public-private partnerships, the next task is evaluate challenges, accessibility, and impacts. So while public-private partners plan for specifics of the SUM implementation, some of the potential challenges to be aware of and needs to be addressed include limited funding availability for piloting and/or implementing these unconventional shared disability strategies. That is one of the biggest trouble in rural communities, having funding. So you have to figure that out. Potential low demand within the rural communities. So that is one challenge that communities or providers have to keep in mind about the low challenge. I mean, they might have more demand in urban communities, but not so much in these small communities. Potential demand, gaining trust of rural riders is important, especially for ride sourcing services. Availability of adequate broadband coverages for SUM operations. Broadband is pretty critical because users access real-time information from online, and having a broadband network through rural communities is very important for these operations to be feasible. So also some of the challenges is accommodating drivers with wheelchair access and accommodating riders who do not have a smartphone or do not have bank accounts. So these are some of the challenges that need to be addressed in task 4. And task 5 is funding and implementation. Availability of funds or grants is essential for piloting or implementing rural shared disability services, as well as subsidizing shared disability trips or services. So unlike transit services, most SUM services are capital light business models and benefit more from operational expenses. So some funding opportunities for rural shared disability services include FTA formula funding, such as Section 5310 and 5311, mobility on demand grants, state DOT funding, community initiatives, and other national and state and local grants. So implementation of rural shared disability starts with a 6 to 12 month time frame for contract setup process, followed by a 6 to 12 month of pilot phase to test out implementation plan. And based on the availability of sustainable funding source, relevant modifications can be made to address any challenges faced in the pilot phase to continue its operations. So this is the five-task process that we came up with based on scanning of various rural shared use mobility implementations across the US. And this five-step could potentially be used for other rural communities for planning and implementation purposes. So that is one of our output, in detail output. And the second output from our study is guidance for state DOTs and other agencies to promote SUM services. So how could these agencies promote shared usability services in rural communities? We have identified 6 opportunities for promoting rural SUMs. I'll go over one by one. The first one is diversify state DOT funding between traditional and SUM services. So traditionally, state DOTs fund traditional transit services in rural communities, but if state DOTs could also fund SUM services, there could be a more potential for implementing these SUM services in rural communities, which could efficiently meet the mobility needs and fill the gaps. The second opportunity is importance of FTA formula grants, 5310 and 5311, MOD grants and state DOT transit funding. So most of the rural transit agencies are funded by these FTA formula grants, and if SUM services are also eligible for eligible through these formula grants, there could be a potential to incorporate more SUM services in rural communities. And FTA does allow for agencies to use their funds for SUM services, but the private providers should partner with transit agencies or local agencies for SUM services to get funds through FTA. So there is an opportunity, definitely an opportunity there. I mean, if you're more interested, you could refer the report where we have provided more details. And it is important to, the third one, it is important to create a one-stop learning platform about rural transportation challenges and SUM opportunities. One of the things that we identified is, like, when we are talking with rural communities, they are not knowledgeable. Most of the people that we talked to were not knowledgeable about a lot of providers, private providers that are available out there that could potentially bring in SUM services. So at the same time, when we talk to private providers, they are not knowledgeable about the unique transportation challenges that exist in rural communities. So there is definitely a gap. So if there could be a one-stop learning platform for both the private transportation providers as well as rural communities and their partners, it could educate people on both the side towards forming public-private partners and and we could see more of these shared usability services in rural areas. The fourth one is ensure availability of broadband internet service in rural areas. This is critical for having shared usable mobility operations in rural communities, because most of these services rely on a strong internet connection. So broadband availability is critical. Fifth one is advocate the significance of transportation towards healthcare and employment in rural communities. And some of the funding could come from these agencies. So it is important to advocate the importance of transportation towards these two sectors. And regional transportation agencies also have an important role to play towards encouraging SUM services. They could plan some pilot shared usability implementations in rural communities in their jurisdiction. So they could definitely have some funds for that. So the regional transportation agencies also could find an opportunity to encourage these in rural communities. With that, I would like to acknowledge the NCHRP Project 2065 panel team for the direction of the project, Valerie Fitzpatrick, the Senior Program Officer at NCHRP, and all the people who have contributed towards the study. I'll be available to take any questions towards the end of the session, but I would like to turn the presentation over to John Ando to continue his talk.
All right. Let me. Oh, I'm on that. You see my presentation okay?
Yes, John.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I'm John Ando. I'm the Executive Director of the COMET in Columbia, South Carolina. and I'll be talking about how our transit authority provides service in both urban and rural areas and how we're able to balance serving both areas appropriately. About us, we are the Central Midlands Regional Transit Authority. We're a fairly new transit authority. We assumed public transit operations from the local electric and gas utility back in 2002. And we are known officially as a regional transportation authority. And we are created by Richland County, Lexington County, and the cities of Forest Acres and Columbia. Our legal boundaries are the same as our local council of governments, which includes Richland, Lexington, Newberry, and Fairfield counties. However, only Richland and Lexington counties are participating in the RTA at this time. Our brand name is the Comet, and we use that name on all of our transit services, and we provide countywide public transportation services throughout Richland and Lexington counties on 34 fixed routes, 4 reflex routes. We have a van pool program, subsidy programs with Lyft and Uber at night into the grocery store, 8 bike share stations in the city of Columbia, and then we also provide ADA paratransit services by the name of DART in our 2 county service area. We transport about 2.8 million passenger trips a year, which of that 5% of those trips are in the rural area and 95% is in the urban area. We utilize a fleet of 83 buses, trolleys, and vans. And we generally operate 7 days a week from 4:45 in the morning until midnight, except Thanksgiving and Christmas Day. This map gives you an idea of our service area and of all the routes that we operate in Richland and Lexington counties. This map is also available on our website at catchthecomet.org if you'd like to get a closer look at it. This map gives you a perspective of our route network, the 3/4 mile radius around our route network, what is defined as urban and what is defined as rural. About 381 square miles of our 1,500 square mile service area is defined as urban. And you'll notice that most of our routes are in the urbanized area. And then we have a collection of deviated fixed routes and express routes that operate in the rural areas. And we'll go into more detail about that shortly. The Comet fixed routes operate throughout Richland and Lexington County. We have 34 of those routes. Corridor routes primarily travel on our major thoroughfares with 30-minute frequencies. We have neighborhood routes that operate in the neighborhood areas of our cities that we serve, as well as some unincorporated areas. We also have connector and shuttle routes that operate downtown, as well as in areas where we have a large collection of people that want to travel a short distance. We have express routes that travel on the highways, as well as to Amazon and Nephron. About 1,500 bus stops and 65 bus shelters. We have a lot of amenities on our buses to make transit attractive: Wi-Fi, cell phone chargers, bike racks, an emergency ride home program, books to read, security cameras, and police and sheriff that rides our buses. DART is the ADA paratransit program that we operate in conjunction with the fixed routes throughout the service area. We have 23 of these buses. It's a service that's only for persons that have a disability that cannot ride regular fixed route transit or access a regular fixed route transit bus stop. And it basically parallels the fixed route system with the same service hours. Reflex is our newest service that we've created within the last 2 years. It's a fixed route bus, but also does door-to-door service. And we operate these in our rural areas of our service area: Denny Terrace, Lower Richland, Eastover, Gadsden, Hopkins, and Batesburg, Leesville. We found the Reflex service to be very effective because it's combining the regular Comet fixed route and the DART service into one vehicle. It has allowed us to improve the productivity of those services when we previously had a regular fixed route bus serving those areas, as well as a separate ADA paratransit bus. The Reflex service is open to everybody. You can simply call 2 hours in advance to have the bus come to your door, or you can ask the bus driver to drop you off at your door within the respective service areas. These services operate primarily Monday through Saturday, with the exception of Denny Terrace, which operates 7 days a week, and basically between the hours of 5 a.m. and 8 p.m. When they do operate. We found, especially in the rural areas, this type of service to be extremely popular, just because of the flexibility and ease of having a small bus come to you instead of having to walk miles to a nearest bus stop. We have the van pool program, which we have a contract with Enterprise to provide. We provide a $500 a month subsidy for this service. We have 6 vans in operations right now. 3 of those vans originate in the urban area. 3 of those vans originate in the rural areas. It's a great way for people to get from their neighborhoods to work. And the nice thing about it is the people can control the schedule of when these vans operate and depart. And the service is available based on their needs and requirements. A program we started 2 years ago in partnership with Lyft and Uber is called Comment on the Go. We use these programs to tackle transportation challenges both in our rural and our urban areas. Within that, we have Comment at Night and Comment to the Market. We'll pay a $5 subsidy for people who want to use these programs with Uber and Lyft. Our DART program provides the wheelchair accessible vehicle service for those that can't ride Uber or Lyft. In addition, our Wave service will also take care of those that do not have a smartphone. We spend about $150,000 a year, and we found this service to be much more effective than previously when we ran regular Comet fixed route bus service until 1 in the morning, costing about $380,000 a year when we were providing that service, carrying less than 1 passenger per hour collectively. So with Comet at Night, that's available 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. Anywhere where we have Comet fixed route service or Reflex deviated fixed route service. We spend about $75,000. It replaced 12 bus routes, and basically it was costing $335,000. So my apologies. Operating 1.5 passengers or less on average. In order to use Comet at Night, we don't just broadly advertise the code. You have to ride a Comet bus in order to get the code, and the code changes monthly. This basically ensures that people are using Comet at Night as a lifeline, whether if they want to go from home to work at night, or if they want to go from their destination at night back home. And this program has just been increasing in ridership month after month ever since it was created. Comment to the Market addresses the challenges that we have with significant numbers of food deserts operating that are around the Columbia metropolitan area. We spend about $75,000 a year for this program. We allow people to do 2 trips per week. We've geo-fenced our service so that you can only use the program if you're going to a grocery store with fresh food or fresh meats anywhere in our service area. And you also have to live or board within a food desert area. This service is available 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., which is during the hours of a large number of the grocery stores that operate in our service area. This map gives you an idea of where our food desert areas are within the Columbia metropolitan area. So those areas in red in both Richland and Lexington counties are where you can get Comment to the Market service. And then you can basically travel to any of those fresh food grocery stores identified in the purple area, which is our fixed route service area and Reflex service area. A lot of the trips for Comment to the Market originates primarily in our rural areas, as well as particularly in the northeastern portion of the city of Columbia, where there's basically no grocery stores in that area. A lot of those grocery stores have moved out to the suburban portions of our service area. This just gives you an idea of the various things that we have at the Comet, our bike share program, our bus shelters, the Uber Lyft program, and our soda cap connector in the downtown Columbia, KC, West Columbia area. So some upcoming projects that we have at the Comet to tackle our urban and rural needs. We are about to create a subsidized taxi program for seniors and persons with disabilities. This is going to be targeted to those that live outside of the DART service area, but within Richland and Lexington County, so primarily in our rural areas, to help connect people to essential life opportunities. We're also going to do the same thing with the volunteer transportation program, and we'll be reimbursing the IRS rate up to 200 miles per month for those folks. The subsidized taxi program will subsidize up to $40 of taxi rides a month for those folks that register. We're going to be investigating doing a micro-transit demonstration in the northeastern portion of Richland County, which is a rural area that has a lot of residential, connecting people to our super stops where they can access regular Comet service to get to other destinations in our service area. And we're developing a mobility as a service app where we have all of our transportation options on one app so people can get basically all the transportation needs that they're looking for at the palm of their finger, at the palm of their hand. And then these are some more of our buses, our typical bus stop sign, our DART vehicle, and our van pool vehicle. It's my contact information if you're curious on how we do a lot of these urban and rural programs to basically diversify ourselves and be a true mobility agency in both Richland and Lexington counties. And I thank you for your time and allowing me to present.
Great. Thanks, John. We now have Kendra McGady. We'll be talking about shared mobility for rural and tribal areas. Kendra, you're on.
Trying to share my screen here.
Yep.
Ooh. Here we go. Sorry, y'all. Here we go. Okay, thank you for having me. My name is Kendra McGady, and I am the director of Pelivan Transit. And I'd like to thank everyone for taking their time this afternoon and hope that everyone is out there staying safe. I'm going to talk to you for just a few minutes about some of the things that we're doing out here in Northeast Oklahoma. Here's a little funny. Okay, here we are. Pelivan Transit is located in Northeast Oklahoma. We are a demand response service. We provide transportation to the Cherokee Nation as one of our tribal consortiums. We also provide transportation services to the Northeast Tribal Transit Consortium. We are a contract provider for them, so we actually operate a 5311 and a 5311C operation here, 5310 as well. We are the CTAA Rural Transportation System of the Year, and that's something that we're very proud of here in Big Cabin. Our service area in Pelivan Transit covers 7 counties of Northeast Oklahoma. We're very rural, as everyone is probably aware. We cover 4,466 square miles. It is demand response service. We do commuter routes for the Cherokee Nation. We provide employment routes for them to and from Tahlequah, which is their capital, and into Catoosa, where they have the Hard Rock Casino. We do shift work operations for them there. We also do VDR, which is variable distance transportation, which is outside of the city limits. We do offer within the city limit operations of the 6 cities that we serve. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about some of the interesting programs that we have here at Pelivan Transit. As I said earlier, we are a rural and tribal operation, so we have a unique little mix here of things. We are the lead agency on the Veterans Ride Connect, and this is a very unique project that was started in 2011. It's been a years-long project. We like to say that we invested in mobility before mobility was even a word here at the Veterans Ride Connect. 6 transit providers got together and answered the call when the Veterans Community Transportation Living Initiative grants were available. And of the partnership that was created was Pelivan Transit. We are the lead agency, Kaiboys Area Transit, Muskogee Creek Nation, which is a full tribal transit, Cimarron Transit, Muskogee County Transit, and Jam Transit. In addition to providing transportation to the Cherokee Nation, our transit partners, Kaiboys, Cimarron and Muskogee County also provide transit to the Cherokee Nation. So that's a really good mix of providers there. Together, we cover 21,000 miles in the south side of Oklahoma, 1/3 of the state, and we provide discounted trips to veterans across that entire service area. I want to talk to you about what the Veterans Ride Connect looks like. This is everyone's questions. The funding options for the Veterans Ride Connect are pretty interesting. We're really proud of what we've done here. We have received, we utilize our 5311 funds, of course, and the 5311C through our tribal operation. But we have also, as a consortium, we seek and obtain 5310 grant funding through INCOG, the Indian Nations Council of Government, that's located in the Tulsa Metro. We also receive private funding. We have a community foundation here at Grand Gateway Economic Development Agency. So we're able to utilize private donors as well for the operation. So we have received Telegen grant funding through the consortium, 5310 funding. The Cherokee Nation does an annual distribution to us every year. We also receive funding, little random grants from Rotary clubs and American Legions, since it is a veteran-based project. In addition to that, we also provide service to the Jack C. Montgomery Hospital in Muskogee, which is a federal VA hospital. And that took a little while to beat down those doors, but once you can get in and get an MOU signed with a facility like that, we have seen the ridership increase significantly in the last probably 2 years, and the Jack C. Montgomery is actually subsidizing a lot of the operation in particular areas of Muskogee County and Pelivan Transit in particular. So it is a very small ecosystem, but it is an ecosystem and it's legit and it's working, and we're very, very proud of it. The partnerships, again, is probably the most interesting part of the consortium. The women that I have the pleasure of working with, they are all female directors. They're very hardworking. And in order to come together to create something like this, you have to really be able to work well together. Strong personalities, everyone's a leader. You have to somehow bring it together. And we were really able to break down some transportation barriers there as far as where to construct the call center, for example, which is here at Pelivan Transit, and where we dispatch the entire operation, 30 counties, through our little mobility center here in Big Cabin. And we also broke down who was going to do the billing, and as far as, you know, capital and things like that. So it's been an interesting project, and there was a lot to it, but we've got everything up and running, and, you know, you just have to work through those kind of issues. Our operations and technology, they kind of go hand in hand. So I want to talk about that just a little bit here. I've lost my notes. Together, operationally, everyone uses their own capital. We use our own rolling stock, dependent upon where the provider is taking the trip. They use their own operational dollars as well. The technology that we have implemented here is really pretty advanced and innovative. We have a web portal that each one of the providers, the 6 transit providers, has access to. They each have a portal. We have a one-call, one-click number that they call into the Veterans Ride Connect here at Pelivan Transit. Then we push the trips out through the portal. And the individual provider in the particular area will either accept or deny that trip. And they contact the individual rider. We have, by way of default, created a regional fare coordination, basically because some of our grant money ran out, so we had to put a structure into place. So there is regional fare coordination across the service area as well. We do utilize, I'll get into a little bit more of our technology down the road. Some of our best practices, as we went through this process, you have to really look at your communities where the greatest impact is going to be made. And that isn't necessarily the biggest impact. It might be with the most clinics in it. It may be variable distance. You have a lot of factors there. It would just depend on the community, I think. Underestimating the riders. That's one of the things. We did adopt an account-based payment system here at Pelivan, which I'll talk about in my next slide. But we were a little worried about that at first, but we have been pleasantly surprised at how well the public and the veterans and the riders have received that, in particular, older individuals and developmentally disabled persons. when you're putting together something like this, you have to really be able to rely on your partnerships and trust one another. And I think that it has to be a full-on commitment. It does take a lot of time. We're all very busy, but it's almost like running a whole nother transit system, but it's totally worth it. When it comes to rolling out things like new technology, we have done those things in phases here at Pelivan Transit, and in particular through the Veterans Ride Connect, and we feel like that is definitely a best practice. We moved from community to community to community, working through each glitch in each individual area, and then before we moved on to the next. And we thought that was, we were a little worried about it at first. We really want to wipe everything out, but it was a great practice. And I would suggest that to anyone who's going to implement something like account-based payment system or on demand. Training, driver training, when you start implementing technology, things can get a little bit nerve-wracking for them. Technology can be frightening, but you have to invest in training and take the time to get everybody on board with that. And driver engagement and public engagement and word of mouth is incredibly important. Each one of us attend all the veteran-sponsored events and state events continually to promote our program. And where we go from here. This is exciting because, as I stated, the Veterans Ride Connect is 21,000 miles and does cover 30 counties, but we have a whole section of the state that we're not even touching. So our next step is obviously to expand the program. We want to continue to seek funding options. Again, through the foundation, we're very fortunate to have that. So we have the ability to seek out private grant funding, and we're in the process of doing some of that right now. We were a little more hopeful before COVID-19 came along. I know that a lot of these private funders are doing several emergency grants, which I certainly appreciate. But again, we really want to seek out additional funding and branch out into the western part of the state so that we can serve the Oklahoma City Metro. In addition to that part of the expansion, we'd also like to add additional social service agencies. Right now we do basically medical trips, and we would like to add nutritional trips and mental health evaluation and medical trips for that as well. As far as our advancement in technologies, we look to roll out an account-based payment system through the entire Veterans Ride Connect fleet, which is 400 vehicles. Ultimately, we hope to do that with all of our providers. And I'm very excited to say that Pelivan Transit, along with Cimarron Transit, Jam Transit, and Kai Boys Area Transit, who are also involved in the Veterans Ride Connect, recently applied for and received an IMI grant through the FTA to implement a regional on-demand transportation system, which will be in the Veterans Ride Connect. So we're really looking forward to that. We're going to do an extended hour of service, and we feel like with so many critical care appointments that we take veterans to, we're hoping that we can do more dialysis in addition to social trips and things like that. But for the Veterans Ride Connect, we're really looking to increase those services, access to after-hour services with dialysis and chemotherapy and things like that. Social service integration, again, Jack C. Montgomery is really helping to subsidize the program, but we would like to get MOUs and agreements in place with other veterans VA administration clinics, especially Oklahoma City. Tulsa is building a new facility, and we hope to work with them, and as well as all the clinics in our service area. And we would like to implement some kind of a volunteer driver program. If you see there, this is something that we're very proud of. We do have one volunteer driver at the Veterans Ride Connect, and it is retired Advocate General of the state of Oklahoma and retired 3-star General Lieutenant Harry Bud Wyatt, who we love and appreciate very, very much. So in a nutshell, that's what we're doing out here, and I'll be available for any questions afterwards. And I certainly thank you all for your time.
Great. Great presentation, Kendra. Thank you. And just one more reminder for the attendees. I see the questions coming up in the chat. So if you have any questions for the speakers, you could start entering in the chat. So the speakers could answer in the meantime, or we could have them towards the end of the session. But the next next speaker will be Creighton Randall, CEO of Mobility Development Group. Creighton will be talking about Meocar and Wogo.
So I'm going to give you, first of all, I'm going to try to compress because I know we're trying to leave time for questions, right, Ranjit?
Yep.
I'll try to be very brief here. I'm going to give you an overview of NeoCar, which is basically rural car sharing, talk about our program impacts and the tie-in with volunteer transportation. You've heard a little bit about that from other presenters, and talk about how we're responding as an operator in this COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So NeoCar is, if you're familiar with Zipcar, functionally in terms of how it works for the user, it's not too different than Zipcar or a number of other car sharing services you've seen, right? This is access to a vehicle on demand by the hour or by the day. Next slide, please. So you can download the app on Google Play or on the Apple Store, and it's really an app-driven service. Car sharing has sort of transitioned gradually away from needing sort of swipe card access to have everything being on the mobile. We had some challenges with that in a rural environment, but by and large, that's been pretty successful. Smartphone adoption is pretty high, and so that's worked out pretty well for us. Next slide, please. This service is about half the price of what you would call like market rate car sharing. So for the user, it's $4 an hour, $35 a day. We have made the decision with this program to not provide subsidies based on income, although the vast majority of the user base is low income. So really there's a kind of a tension between branding this service the way you might brand a Zipcar-like service as something that is flexible, convenient, attractive, but also kind of at the core of the service, having a back end that is much more intensive in terms of being almost like a social service agency or a utility. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in a second. Next slide, please. So the service is all electric. We have 3 vehicle types: Chevy Bolt, Chrysler Pacifica minivan, which has been very popular, and BMW i3. So these are the kind of best options in terms of range on the market and also affordability. This program is funded by the California Air Resources Board. So it is, at its core, it's an all-electric program, and really the first of its kind in a rural setting, which is key to sort of how the geography is kind of key to how it's rolled out. Next slide, please. So you'll see we're in 7 communities in the rural San Joaquin Valley. So this is Kern and Tulare counties. If you think of Fresno, Bakersfield, if you have a general sense of that, this is sort of in between those 2 mid-sized cities. So the sites range from cities of 5,000 to 10,000 in population on the low end, and the largest city that we're involved with here is Visalia, which is a city of about 130,000. There are 27 cars in the program. There are 300 members in the service. Of that, about 200 have fully passed through the program, and we're seeing the program pretty popular right now. So we're 9 months in. Next slide, please. And we've been pretty involved in the first several months, really more of the first 6 months of the service, in getting the location set up, right? So this was a gradual rollout. It took about 6 months to get all the cars and the location set up. There was some electric vehicle charging infrastructure that needed to go in. There was some that we relied on that was sort of existing infrastructure, right? Which is fairly advanced, as you can imagine, in the state of California. And so, next slide, please. Key to that flexibility is not only on the infrastructure itself, but also the flexibility in terms of use cases. Sorry, I went back 1 slide there. So, this is about individual car sharing, but it's also about being flexible for different use cases. Like, I'm sorry, yeah. I have my slide order reversed here. It's key to be flexible in terms of the type of trips that might be commercial trips, and I'll get to that a little bit more later. That might be an individual using it for commercial use in a ride-hailing, ride-sharing, or volunteer transportation setting. And it might also be a community group that needs staff access to a vehicle. The smaller these programs are, the more it's important that the provider is really open-minded to the different types of trips, but also the different types of users that might interact with a service like this. Key to this program has also been Self-Help Enterprises, who's been the core community partner. Self-Help is a affordable housing provider at their core, and so they have both provided the space for the vehicles. Most of these cars are located at basically community centers within self-help housing locations. But they've also been very key in terms of outreach and marketing. They've been the sort of primary project partner. So where our team, Mobility Development, has sort of provided the back-end infrastructure for the program, Self-Help is really the face of the program and key to bringing those members through the door. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit later about professional drivers. I will say that although the program is structured as car sharing and the pricing and the access to the program is that, even before
Yeah, Creighton, you still there?
efficient in terms of those trip types. The other key thing I want to highlight here on NeoCar is that next slide, please. Is the team, right? So the way we delivered this service was essentially to say, look, we've got a team with national expertise. Let's lean on 15 years of experience in the car sharing industry, but let's also make sure that we are acknowledging that this will be eventually a social service, that this is largely going to serve low-income population that is going to require a lot of hands-on service. And so really building up that team locally is important. As we've done in other markets, this program is transitioning into a standalone 501c3 nonprofit to really be the long-term home for the program. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a little bit about program results before. We've got 300 plus applicants at this point, 200 enrolled members, 120 folks actively using the service, and we are seeing pretty good use from the program so far. So for only 9 months in, about 3 hours of use per car per day is good for a car share program. A lot of these trips are longer distance in nature, so the trips are longer distance-wise, but they're also longer in terms of how people use the service. Multi-day trips are very popular. A member, for example, might have a recurring doctor's appointment every day if they're elderly, a check-in or travel to a dialysis appointment. And so the car becomes something that they're using either in a multi-day format or booking that same car out maybe every day during a certain window. And that's really something that you don't traditionally see with car sharing, but by opening up the program in these rural geographies, but also with a price point I mentioned earlier, we've really been able to, I think, see different patterns of use than you normally would see with car share. And next slide, please. So good start. Where do we go from here? This program is part of a larger network called the Ecosystem of Shared Mobility in the San Joaquin Valley, basically Central California. And one part of the program is an integrated app called Vamos that kind of knits together a bunch of rural transit options, which can tend to be pretty strong in California in particular. However, with any transit system, right, there's going to be gaps. These are exacerbated in a lot of ways in rural settings. So you need to have kind of a web to catch other trips. And as a separate part of this state-funded grant, counties north of our project area for NeoCar have served to sort of catch that web, if you will. Our team brought in a program partner called the Volunteer Transportation Center. Next slide. Based on some work that we've done with VTC in upstate New York, it's been funded by FTA and Federal Highway Administration through the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. Volunteer Transportation Center, just briefly, is as far as we know, the largest volunteer transportation program in the country. 200,000 trips a year, about 5 million miles traveled a year. In some ways, a drop in the bucket. That there are something in the range of 6-8 million volunteer trips provided every year, but primarily they're done by smaller, church groups, for example. And so we've been working closely with the VTC based out of Watertown, New York, to look at how you build in back-end efficiencies, basically Uber-like efficiencies in your program. That's both an app for the user and an app for the driver as well. And so we've been able to pull some of that into the San Joaquin Valley. And we're hopeful that moving forward, we'll actually have an opportunity through some funding through DOE and the FTA IMI program to kind of knit these pieces together. So right now, these are separate programs, but if you can kind of picture a year from now, someone having access to an electric car and renting it by the hour, by the day, also able to provide a trip for some.
Creighton, I think we're losing your voice. We can.
COVID-19. Oh, last slide, please. So, car sharing in general has been pretty hard hit by these times. Many programs are shut down entirely. You've seen some bankruptcies and full-scale closures. Others are operating at 20 to 50% capacity. MeoCar, as well as Blue LA, which is another state-funded program in Los Angeles, have temporarily been mothballed. And Blue LA just resumed this week. We're hoping to bring MeoCar back in a few weeks. Some of the things I talked about earlier, we're seeing cities sort of reinforce during this time. I think moving forward, you're going to see use of cars for both essential transportation, but more particularly work-related trips, as being something that in these coming months is really key. So we think that's going to mean that car sharing adapts toward That's it in a nutshell.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Creighton. Pete, should I administer the questions here?
Yeah, Tad had his in a while ago, and there's also one directed at Kendra.
Yep. So, Kendra, a question for you. How did you overcome the turfism typically associated with the partnerships among varying funding streams available in your community?
Well, I think with that, you just have to be really and truly committed to the heart of the project. There is turfism that goes along with these things from time to time, and we have had to work through a few things, but basically we're committed. And what we do is if we receive a pot of funding, we split it. We split it evenly, regardless of who got it or where it came from. We're very good at, in particular, our 5310 operation. We have 5310 funds that we can receive through ODOT and that we can receive through INCOG, which is the Indian Nation Councils of Government. Our VRC gets a lot of funding from there. And basically what we do is if one transit provider isn't making enough trips into Tulsa, we share that money and we give them what we have left. So again, I think that you just have to get past those things and look at this as a separate service, independent almost of your own transit system that you operate, and believe in the heart of the project and be committed to that and just get over it. Work together, the heart of the project always. So
great. Yep. So we have one more question, I think pretty much for all panel members from Tad Weiser. From a data perspective, as EPA, DOE, academic institutions, and others are developing modeling to represent the evolving transportation demand and choices nationally, it's obviously important that data not just drawn from the data, but urban areas and regions. Any thoughts from your unique perspective about emerging data sources to help improve representation of existing potential existing or potential new mobility in the wide variety of rural areas in nationwide assessments.
Or I can jump in on that. This is Creighton. So we've been lucky in our program in the San Joaquin Valley to have UC Davis as a core partner in the project, and that's really lent some pretty strong modeling on the front end of the project that worked its way into where we picked sites, where we picked communities, where the need was greatest. UC Davis has done some really interesting work on kind of prioritizing need, but then the perhaps the most exciting part is we've got all this trip data, right? One of the advantages with going with a nonprofit model is we've got everything. We've got all the information about trips, down to the finest detail. And so we're really able to, certainly, of course, keeping personal information confidential, provide some pretty rich analysis in terms of not only the trips themselves, but also having an ability to survey riders right after they've taken the trip. And a lot of flexibility with providing incentives there. So a little early to provide results. We're only 9 months in, but we do think there's going to be a lot of rich data coming out of this program.
Great. A question from Andrea Hamry for John. Did you face any resistance to providing subsidies for rides on private services like Uber or Lyft?
I did not, actually. I actually got a lot of praise in the community because we were trying to tackle, especially with our market program, a growing problem of how to get people from low-income areas to the grocery store. Questions have asked about, what about taxi participation? So that's where the creation of the subsidized taxi program comes into play, because we'll be able to bring in the taxi cabs as well as Uber and Lyft through use of what we call a prepaid Visa card that would be loaded with money restricted to private transportation services.
Okay. So one more question we have here from Estelle Hollander. I know John has answered it, but I wanted to give other panel members a chance if they have an instance. I'd be curious if any of the presenters have thought on how to overcome the challenges in implementing shared mobility in rural and tribal areas, like lack of electricity, spotty cell service, lack of sidewalks, high speed limits, etc. Do you know of any use cases that that overcame these? I could speak to one of the projects that I haven't we have conducted case studies in rural communities. I haven't came across these challenges, but definitely some of the challenges we have observed from rural communities are lack of cell phones for people to use on-demand service, or lack of credit cards for them to enroll in their auto payment setup. So in such situations, the mobility providers have arranged for a customer service agent to, if there is no cell phone, they would be getting a call or making a call to make a reservation for an on-demand trip. If people are not having credit card accounts, they provided a prepaid card for people, for them to use for these shared disability services. So those are some of, but lack of spotty cell phone service or broadband coverage is one of the leading concern from rural communities who have not implemented shared disability services. But we did observe that in our study, but I'll give a chance to Creighton or Kendra to see if they have any of these challenges experienced.
I have not.
I would second that this was a big thing we grappled with, was spotty cell phone service. So you can imagine it has two dimensions to it in a car share environment, because it's both the car itself, right? You've got a vehicle.
Oh, Creighton, we're losing you. One last question I think we can go over from Tri. So, sorry, Creighton, we just lost you.
So for the record, I am not in a rural area.
Okay.
I am not in a rural area, but I am experiencing connectivity issues, which I will talk about. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, so it's access in the car when I'm standing next to it, right? And I've got, not only is it like perhaps spotty service, but it may also be the age of the phone, right? So if I got the latest updates to the app, you know, can my phone actually function with this app if it's a 5-year-old phone? That's been a pretty major problem.
Yep. All right. We just passed 4, and I would like to thank all the presenters today for their great presentations, and also for the attendees for all the wonderful questions and interaction. And I would like to thank Shared Mobility Center for this opportunity, and thank you for all the participants for involving this session.